Many people are ending up in old age, above 45 years old, and then they're dealing with a layoff, or they deal with some kind of financial setback and it puts them in a very difficult position. And we're going to go through some clips of that. People who are 45 and above who end up, dealing with a layoff, can't find another job after that layoff due to ageism or due to a lack of high paying jobs in the job market. Then they have to take a massive pay cut and deal with very difficult circumstances. Now, before we go through these clips, we've got a ton of clips on the way. I want to just let you know about my coaching, right? So I try to help my clients, typically when in their 20s, 30s, or early 40s, typically, whereby they could plan ahead for these situations, right? By setting themselves up correctly financially, dealing with potential layoffs, and all the other financial challenges that can come across throughout life. So you can plan ahead, so you don't end up effectively being caught up in this type of scenarios that we're going to cover, dealing with layoffs. And on top of that, you might have high debt, might have an unexpected divorce, and one bad year, particularly later on in your life, can completely finish you and destroy good decisions you made earlier, right? I've spent over 10 years working at Goldman's, Morgan Stanley, and many other companies, top finance firms, and I help people throughout their career to help manage their different scenarios, right? So if you want to get in touch with me, I'll be happy to help you with your career. Let's get through a couple of these clips here.
At 62. A lot of people assumed that I retired. And the reality is that I did not retire. I took a new job and I will probably never be able to retire. I went through a divorce in my later 50s and had to start over. Even though I can't retire, what I can do is I can reinvent. I can reinvent myself as many times as I choose, as I need to, as I want to. And I just want to say that your job is not everything. And I do get that for some people, maybe it has to be at this point in time, as mine was. But there's so many different things that you could do to make your life a little more enjoyable and not be taken down by your job. And that was really what I did. I just took my power back and I found another job. And I just wanted to say that I think that we can all do this at any point in our lives. And I believe it, and that's how I'll live the rest of my life. And I don't even know if I would want to retire if I could. Well, I suppose it would be nice.
So that's just a very brief clip there, but you can see what's going on right now in society, right? You have many people who are dealing with financial dysfunction and social dysfunction. In this case, she mentioned a divorce, right? So this is the situation. Many people, they call it, believe a grey divorce, when people typically get a divorce later on in life. And a lot of those things are unexpected. Now, typically from the male end, you're more likely to lose money in a divorce, of course, because the alimony and the divorce settlements, child support payments typically are a burden on the man, and the woman will typically get the house, get the property, and get some payments from you, whether it's through alimony or child support. So it's a very difficult scenario to deal with, particularly if you're a man and you're playing the social status game, you're dependent on one source of income, which would be your job, and then you end up in a situation where you get a divorce. Like I assume she's working because maybe she doesn't have a husband's money to rely on or her own savings to rely on. So she's 62 and she can never retire. Now, no one wants to be in that position, because throughout life, no matter how well you try to make good decisions, you can have setbacks. It could be a health issue, it could be a divorce that you weren't expecting. Maybe you have a child and they have some issues, you need to pay for extra health issues, or it could be, paying for their school, paying for college, paying for private tuition, things like that. So you have all these additional expenses that can build up. And many people who can't retire when they're in their old age is also because they didn't make smart financial decisions. Typically what that involved, it means that they probably were living beyond their means. Many people these days, they try to live the baby boomer lifestyle, which is something you could do in previous generations, buy a big house in the suburbs, take all your kids and send them to private school and buy expensive cars, have multiple cars, things like that. I'm not saying some people can't do that or you shouldn't do that if you don't want to, but it ends up resulting in a scenario where, you have a few setbacks and the job market isn't great. The social dynamics are off. That's why there is a high divorce rate. And then all of a sudden you're stuck working into your 70s, right? Maybe, filling up grocery bags for a very low minimum wage when you should be retiring and enjoying your life. So this is the thing you got to think about about when you see someone like this who's 62, she can't retire, what is your end game? Like, how are you planning ahead for your end game? Are you going to work forever? Do you really think you're going to make it to managing director or a senior role in your job? Or are you going to end up like many people who end up at the mid-level? And increasingly people are ending up at the mid-level with average salaries, and they're living beyond their means. They don't have stability, particularly with the layoffs. They're not planning ahead, right? You've got to think about what you're going to do.
Many other Gen Xers out there that are jobless and finding it impossible to find a job. Or is it just us? My husband and I have been out of work, and we've been doing side hustles, but it's barely keeping us afloat. And come this next month, all savings is depleted. It won't keep us afloat. And we just can't find a job. Nobody's calling. We're sending out resumes. Nobody's calling. He's got 2 interviews. Both ended up filling from within, so they say. And it's just freaking scary. Nothing prepared us for this. To be in our 50s and wondering how the heck we're going to survive. And we have small children. We have a 10 and 11-year-old. So it's not just like us. Very stressful.
This is a difficult predicament another woman's in, right? Firstly, if you're having kids later on in life, and this is what many people are doing because they can't find financial stability early on in life. In their 20s, they may be working a job and they can't really climb the corporate ladder. Then they're stuck in a situation in their 30s where they're just getting into their career. Maybe they have 1 or 2 setbacks, a layoff here and there. Buying a house costs more money, and by the time they have kids, they're in the early 40s. And then there's someone like this who is in her 50s, and her kids, she said, are 10 or 11 years old. And this is the worrying reality for many people, whereby by the time they can afford to have kids, it's so later on in life, right? By the time you're 60, your kids are 20 years old because you had them when you were in your 40s, right? So it creates this difficult dynamic whereby, how you manage to kind of deal with that with financial setbacks, right? If you're dealing with a layoff, your partner is, you've got 2 kids to feed, you maybe can rely on some savings, but typically this age group and this demographic, and I'm not blaming them, it's just they should have really thought ahead. I always knew the boomer lifestyle was kind of unrealistic for millennial generation, which I'm part of, Gen Z, and even some people who are older than that. It's right, don't try to aim for that living the standard middle class lifestyle, because you'll get rug pulled. You'll get situations that are going to come up that you won't expect. And sometimes I do think what puts people in a position where they're having kids such later in life, particularly when they are older, because in her generation, like Gen X and older, they had an opportunity to buy more affordable property, right? It's before the property prices increased so dramatically that you see typically within the millennial generation and Gen Z, you have to deal with that, who might not be able to ever afford a property. So I wonder, what were they doing? And I think, like I said, they're probably going on tons of expensive holidays, thinking putting off having kids would make sense to them. Their stable 9 to 5 would exist forever, but clearly that's not the case, right? And this is the thing, right? And she also mentioned doing a side hustle. Now, side hustles, do they really pay off? And I'm not saying they don't. Many people have side hustles that are quite successful, even though it takes some time to build. It's like when you're starting a side hustle, many people go into the typical side hustle. They'll think, I'll set up a TikTok shop, I'll do drop shipping, I'll do something that's kind of predictable that everyone else is trying to do, where it's overcrowded, it's saturated, maybe they don't have expertise in it, or they hear something like that's the trend to do. For example, many people start to sell pet accessories or pet food or something around pets, because more and more people are actually having pets instead of having kids. So it's like a booming industry right now, right? Setting up a dog care, a dog walking kind of center, selling accessories online for dogs and cats and things like that, because people are having more dogs and cats than kids. So, and then all of a sudden they don't really know the market, they're not really that interested in it, and then they try to start drop shipping in it and it doesn't work out, right? So these are the type of things to really consider, because lots of people are coping. And when we think of coping mechanisms, people think, oh, they're just distracting themselves with Netflix or fast food or video games or politics, things like that. They're using that as a cope. But many people are actually using a side hustle as a cope. They're like, oh, the side hustle's got to work out. It's got to work out. It doesn't matter if I lost my job. I'll just keep going with the drop shipping thing, Amazon FBA or something. And it doesn't work out, right? Because they're not being realistic. They're not really thinking about their skills and how to benefit from that, right? They're not planning ahead. And many of these people end up doing a situation where Like she mentions, you might be going for jobs, and lots of people waste their time doing this, where you go for lots of job applications, you go for many interviews, and then companies are just looking to hire an internal hire, but just for like legal reasons and employment law, they just have to demonstrate that they're interviewing external candidates to give everyone a fair chance in the job market to be hired for the position. Meanwhile, they've already got a real solid option internally that is going to fill the job. So these are the type of things to plan for, time wasting processes within the job application process that you can't really predict or like guess, so you can't really plan ahead for that. Now, the most important lesson to learn from her is, of course, that beyond planning ahead before you hit this type of roadblock in your life with many different issues, is kind of, if you're in her position, you got to keep pushing till it works, right? Not go necessarily, say, on TikTok kind of begging for a job or an opportunity, but really think carefully what your skills are and how you can kind of realign it maybe to another industry where there is a demand, sell it as a freelance skill rather than just doing random side hustles, right? Doing similar office jobs in other industries, right? Or gig work, things like that. So it's easier said than done, I know, but really people like this should have planned ahead.
We have to continue working.
Hi guys, I'm here at job number 1 for the week. And I just want to say that I feel like I am so far behind in retirement. I even think retiring at 80 is a dream for me right now. I'm not even joking. Early retirement, I feel like is out the window unless I win the lottery. I just think that me getting cancer and going through all that entailed, the chemo, the radiation, the multiple surgeries, still having to go every 6 months to get checkups and to get an infusion. And then also going through a separation and a divorce back to back is like a double whammy for my finances. And I just feel like plus I was a stay-at-home mom for 7.5 years before before me and my ex decided to split up and I had to go back to work. So my ex, but I guess it was me too. I'm glad it happened. Don't get me wrong, but it was definitely his choice. Put down my numbers. I'm 43. Going to be 44 next month. And I just feel like retirement is so out of the realm of, I just don't know. I was an idiot. I was an idiot and I focused a lot of my time and energy on building his career. And I was like, it's fine. Because once the kids are in school, it'll be my turn and we'll work on me. And that didn't happen. And that sucks. But I can be a victim, or I can put my big girl panties on, which I do every day as a single mom, working 2 jobs, 7 days a week. And I can start really focusing on me and my retirement and my future. And also, I got 2 kids that I want to at least help with college. Maybe not put them through all the way, but help them. I don't know. Help me, guys. Help me.
So here we have another TikTok beggar, right? Which is kind of embarrassing the way what is she begging for right now? It's like people to give her random advice in the TikTok comments is kind of a bit awkward. So what she's done, she's been zeroed out in life, right? And this is what I try to help my clients avoid through career coaching, right? She's dealing with a layoff, she's dealing with a divorce, and she's dealing with health issues, right? Now, some of those things you might do your best to avoid. No one wants to get laid off. No one wants to have a divorce. No one wants to have health issues, of course. So you can make all the right decisions. And the thing is, it's likely that one of them could just happen in your life, right? The most common would be layoffs or divorce. If you're getting married, 50% of marriages end in divorce. I think it's like 70% of them are initiated by a woman. So the whole point is you can do your best to avoid all of these things, eat healthy, work out, things like that. But sometimes things come up that you just can't avoid. Over the course of anyone's life, 70 or 80 years, you're going to have to deal with some setbacks that even if you try to make the right decisions, you might have to deal with. And the thing is, how can you plan ahead? And I'm not saying you should sacrifice your whole life and all your goals, but you have to a certain extent in this very unstable society, be a minimalist, focus on having a bigger investment portfolio, finding fulfillment in life in things that don't necessarily involve spending tons of money, whether it's a hobby, spending time in nature. I often mention martial arts is a good thing that lots of people like. And also thinking about how dysfunctional and transactional most relationships are. And I mean relationships not just between men and women, but also with the company you're working for, friends and family too, right? In the sense that to a certain extent, because people are kind of using someone else to meet their whatever their end goal would be, like a company's using you to underpay you and get you to do tons of work, or someone in a relationship might be using you for money or social status or security and financial stability. You should think what commitment you want to have to people in general, right? Because there's so many dysfunctions you see in society right now that have nothing to do with finances or the economy or AI taking jobs or whatever. It's between people. it's a toxic manager, a difficult co-worker, a nagging wife, an annoying husband, whatever it would be, right? People, lots of people these days, and this is a bit of a tangent, but they're talking about all these big political movements, protesting in the streets for one thing or another. And I'm thinking, you can't even get two people on the same page often in a relationship. So it's like you want to have these big movements against the government or this or that. And it's like you've got so much dysfunction, divide and conquer between different races, religions, men and women, gender war, culture war, difficulty with day-to-day people you have to deal with. You can't even get unity amongst them. So it's like, how much commitment do you want to put in people? I think a lot of the time the biggest risk you deal with in your life isn't necessarily financial, it's other people, it's people risk, it's not financial risk. And many people don't think about it that way. They're just thinking, about their finances, or, they have to get married because it's the thing to do. But it's like, does it actually make sense for you? And how could that really destroy your finances later on, and your freedom and your peace and things like that? Now, she mentioned being a stay-at-home mother, and she was focused on raising the kids while her husband focused on her career. But it's very interesting how, this kind of, I don't know how to word it in a nice way, but being bitter or being resentful towards her husband who was focusing on his career to provide for the family. Now, we don't know the ins and outs of the relationship, right? Maybe it was her fault, maybe it was his fault, there was a divorce. But the whole point is, it's like, you can't be like, oh, well, I'm sacrificing my career to raise my kids. Like, you decided to have kids, and typically woman would be the one looking after kids in the younger years before she returns to the whatever industry she works in. It's like the whole thing about having kids these days, it's like people look at it as such a nuisance and a drain. It's like a chore that you have to do. So it's like, really think carefully, not only about getting married, but having kids, and if it works for you and your finances, rather than being resentful to your partner or your kids that maybe you really didn't want the marriage, maybe you didn't really want kids, right? She also mentioned she's 43 years old, and she's dealing with all these setbacks at the same time. And by the time you get back on your feet, it can take a few years. Like, let's just say it takes 6 months to a year to get a job. Then it takes some time to maybe emotionally get over a divorce before you're in a relationship, or you decide to be single over the long term. Then on top of that, you're recovering from health issues. I don't want to say it's over, but this is the type of situation that can end up like it's over. Like, how are you going to recover from all of that, right? And then she also mentions that, she's a single mom with 2 kids, and it's like, who's going to want to be in a relationship with that, right? Particularly if they're younger kids. You're going to have either a simp, a beta orbiter, a beta bucks who's probably going to, marry her and things like that. Probably be a dead-end relationship, right? This is the thing about what you see here. Typically, we see e-begging, or like this. E-begging is another word for begging online. Like, you have emails, you have e-begging. These are what people do when they go online and look for attention and money indirectly. Typically, it's younger, more attractive women who might do this on TikTok or Instagram, and then some wealthy guy might DM her and she has a hookup with him and gets paid and things like that. But like the Instagram models that go to Dubai, the porta potty models, right? But with her, she's not really going to get a bunch of guys opting, I want to save her, right? I want to be the simp to save her. You're just not going to have that, right? That kind of retirement plan of begging on TikTok only works if you're like a woman who's attractive in your early 20s. And this is what happens when people don't plan ahead. They end up falling down the social ladder. Like, she's going to fall down dramatically. She could go from working a decent paying office job that might be, let's just say 80K to 100K, depending on where she lives. Let's just say a decent paying middle class office job, to she can't find any job. She ends up having to work in a grocery store like a Walmart, let's just say, or Target for some time until she can find an office job. And then she ends up spending 5, 10, 15 years doing that minimum wage job because she's fallen so behind in life. And this is how people dramatically fall behind in life, because they're not planning ahead in their career and their finances, right? Instead, what would you need to do? What would I advise? Now, typically, it's easier to advise this for a man or a single man, right? If I would advise many men out there, you can do what you want, of course, but to lay low. And what I mean by that, having low living costs, having a relatively high-paying corporate job, working on building a side hustle. If possible, again, it's just ideal circumstances, is you don't have like really toxic relationship, whether it's friendship, family, or a woman in your life who's really dragging you down with negativity, people who are wasting your time, people who are always talking down on you. If you're trying to start a side hustle and you've got family members or like I say, a friend, GF, who are talking you down all the time and saying, oh, just spend the evening watching Netflix and chill and order fast food and waste time, going to concerts and things like that. Not saying you can't do any of that, but if you're trying to focus on a side hustle and escaping your situation, maybe moving abroad where there's higher quality of life and lower living costs, don't let people get in the way of that, right? And if you're single and you have less commitment, you're not bogged down in a marriage, you don't have kids, even though those can be good things, you're more adaptable to working abroad, moving, working longer work hours to make more money to save and invest. Lots of guys these days who are single, they're becoming truck drivers, getting a CDL license if you're familiar with that, so they can become a truck driver, and they don't have a family waiting for them back at home. They don't have a lot of stress and commitment, so they can spend many hours on the road driving around doing the truck deliveries, things like that, and then they get paid quite well and they retire relatively early. So it's up to you, like I say, what you want to do, but it's worthwhile planning ahead so you don't end up in the situation like some of these people we're seeing here. And the other thing I would say is, I don't want to feel too negative. I'm working on, my health too, right? Working out more regularly and just being better with my health, right? But one thing I want to say is, when we see some of these older people, like you'll see in this video and another video I've got coming up, is sometimes people, they neglect their health. They focus all the time on their career or their relationship, and they don't balance things. And I would say there's 3 scales you should value success on: health, wealth, and freedom, right? Now you can add relationships to that if that makes sense to you, but I would say try to be good at all of those, right? And try to be like, okay, I'm going to maximize my health, maximize my wealth, and maximize my freedom. Now there's broad definitions of that. Do you want to maximize your health by eating healthy and going to the gym? Are you into running or swimming or whatever that would be? When it comes to wealth, is it more so making money from your day job or having an average job and focusing on a side hustle? Your freedom, is it living anywhere you want in the world by making an income online? But if you focus on HWF, which I consider my corporate values, right? When you go to a company, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, they have corporate values. Like, okay, at Morgan Stanley, diversity is one of their corporate values. At Goldman Sachs, is putting the customer first, things like that. What are your personal important values? And I tried to think about that. Like, okay, how can I split my day to focus on health, focus on wealth, focus on my freedom, whatever that would be? And that's how you should look to maximize your life. Otherwise, you end up in a situation like this, where it's like, okay, maybe she was focusing on her family life and not her health, right? And not her wealth. And now she's dealing with setbacks there. Other people, we're going to go through in future video, if they focus on just their job, they just focus on their wealth, right? And then they've sacrificed their health and they have to deal with that later in life. So this is the type of thing. Try to maximize your life across health, wealth, and freedom. See them as your 3 kind of success scales rather than just your career.
I just woke up realizing that I don't have a job. I have to say it, I'm unemployed. Wow. There was a lot of crying that went on yesterday because the shock value was it was freaking bad. Somebody's got to get better at letting people go because, dude, wow. Anyway, I don't think people are going to hire me because I'm 58 and I'm a woman. I'm excellent in my job. I'm freaking amazing at my job. I'm a writer, I'm an editor, I do social media, I do newsletters for companies, I do press kits, press releases. I'm actually a ghostwriter as a side hustle that I can't turn into a full-time thing at the moment, but I don't think people are going to hire me because they don't want someone 58
years old, and I feel like I'm starting all over again. I got laid off at the end of last year in 2024. We're now in May of 2025, and I still don't have a job. I'm applying. I've applied to almost 200 different positions. I've had interviews. I've had callbacks. Nobody has pulled the trigger. I did work in education, and so now I'm still just trying to find a job. I'm trying to do other things. I'm exploring this TikTok stuff. I am trying to sell on Poshmark, selling used clothes, whether I'm selling my own or I go thrifting and I resell there. I am making woodworking things so I can sell them on Facebook Marketplace, but I don't know if it's my age. I don't know if it's the industry. I just don't know what to do.
Shout out to all the hagmaxers out there. But what we want to do is go through this in a bit of detail. So the first woman we saw, she's like 58 years old, and this woman's like 50 years old. a funny place to pause it. But the point out there is like, what ends up happening with people's lives in this economy is really dysfunctional, right? So I would say if you're in your late 50s, you should have already planned for early retirement, right? Like I say, so many people, they got too comfortable. I remember a few months ago, I was traveling and I was at a major train station in London near an airport. And there were two older women around the age group you see here, 50 something, I would say late 40s, early 50s. And they were talking amongst themselves about everything is so expensive, paying for taxis, like £100 for taxis, things like that. And I understand, everything is expensive, everyone's noticing inflation, but I really do think if you're that at a later stage in life and you haven't planned for that, you end up like this. And it's one thing to be in your mid 20s or 30s even, or even early 40s, where you've been building up a side hustle, a nest egg, an investment portfolio. That kind of makes sense. But if you're at the point where you're like in your 50s and you're stressing about money, it really suggests that you've made poor decisions along your life, right? Along your whole life, because I have a hard time believing you didn't have enough time to plan, particularly when the economy was a lot better than it is now. And even like me, over the course of my over 10 years in the finance industry, even early on, I was like, this whole thing seems bogus. Like, a lot of the money is just obviously printed out of thin air. The government is lying about everything. The companies are lying about everything. They lie to you about promotions, about pay raises, lots of incompetent people in senior roles, lots of women like this in management roles. And you start thinking, hold on, how are these people, this whole economy is fake. The jobs are fake. The money's fake. Everything you're told is basically fake. Your tax money gets wasted on conflicts overseas you don't agree with. It's just the even education system. I remember being at school, I would consistently get top grades because I would spend so many hours teaching myself outside of school hours, to the point where I was skipping school to teach myself, because I just realized that's more effective. And then I just practice the exam questions a lot. The whole point is, so many things are just bogus. It's like, how did you not figure it out early and plan ahead? Particularly if you are 50 years old now, when you had more of an opportunity to plan ahead. You don't dealing with that terrible economy we had now throughout your life, right? It's going to be so much difficult for Gen Z to build wealth compared to Gen X. So let's go through these situations, right? So firstly, we got this woman here. Now, the thing is, if you're that late in your career, it's like you should be focused on your family at this point, right? Rather maybe just raising your kids. Or if you have older kids, spending more time with them. It's all about, it's not talking about, you shouldn't be focused on corporate careers. You should be focused on cooking, right? Looking after your family or your husband, right? Avoiding, a lot of this typical difficult dynamic, like I say, you see with other demographics. It should be a lot easier in her life. She should have been a healthy marriage, maybe with a wealthy husband, things like that. And that's like useful career advice for someone like this, right? Like early on in life, she should have been setting up herself financially with, like I say, supporting a husband in a high paying job or with a high paying business, raising her kids right, who should be able to maybe help her out financially, rather than her looking for a job when she's like 58 years old. Hopefully she has some kids who are doing relatively well, but if not, and she just focused on her career, not having kids, not raising them right, they're not contributing to her financially, whether it's a kids or a husband, it's just like this difficult dynamic. And this is kind of the end game for the girl boss. She has been traveled to tons of countries, slept around on Tinder or whatever it would be, had a divorce, maybe made some money from that, but she doesn't have the stability and created the life circumstances where later in life she has a decent quality of life with her family members, with her husband, things like that. All she has to show for it is maybe a job title, some savings, and she's kind of discarded. And she's realizing maybe the earlier opportunity she might have got in life could have been based on her looks, could have been based on the fact she had attention from different guys, and maybe she didn't lock one guy down, and then she didn't focus on building a family either. So when you're an older woman, there's a common metaphor out there you might have seen in the red pill and things like that, where an older woman is facing the reality that a younger man deals with, where they end up getting ignored, getting treated like a second-class citizen, and they weren't planned for that. They weren't prepared for that, because a lot of these women had a really easy life until the point they started getting old and hit the wall, and they stopped becoming a preference for senior management, maybe to put them in managerial roles and things like that and give them special attention. Now, if we go look at the second situation, woman who's about 50 years old, she's doing too many side hustles. It's too scattered. And this is what you hear with people going, oh, I'm working on a side hustle. I've got a side hustle doing woodwork, selling used clothes, doing other things, exploring TikTok shop and things like that. And this is the thing, it becomes quite a rough reality for a lot of these people, right? They did not plan ahead for this type of situation. They need to focus on one thing and go all in, focus on what their specific expertise is. And unfortunately, when you see people like that, they don't have any expertise. They have a general interest in being a consumer, and they tend to try to turn being a dumb consumer, a materialistic person their whole life, into a side hustle. Like, yeah, I'm buying and selling my clothes, right? I'm selling clothes that I used to wear, my old clothes. I'm buying clothes at thrift stores and selling them online. And it's kind of like, that's not really going to pay the bills, right? That's really not a skill to have, to be honest. It's just like, oh, I'm selling things I used to use, and some other clothes I think could be highly, could get a high price when I resell them, right? And then woodwork. And it's like, why would you go into woodwork? Do you have a background from woodwork, or it's just a hobby you're trying to turn into a skill that you're trying to sell? It's kind of ridiculous. This is what I mean. You need to focus on one side hustle if you're going to do that, and don't just be so casually, like she's saying, oh, I'm exploring TikTok shop. It's just like, it's too late to be exploring things in your 50s. You should know exactly who you are and what you want and what your skills are, and go all in with that with high energy, rather than just being completely lost. If you're a woman lost in your 50s, if you're anyone lost in your 50s, you're a joke, right? You're not going to get taken seriously. And sometimes when you hear about these so-called evil secret societies, or the Economic Forum that wants to depopulate the earth and they want to reduce the population, it's because there are lots of people like this who are like useless eaters, useless consumers. They're not adding anything to society. They don't have any particular skill or even good analytical skills. They're just there going through the motions. So people like this are typically like senior management or senior middle management in their 40s and 50s, and you're dealing with them and you're like, they don't really know what they're doing. They're probably just in the right social circle in the corporate world to be in the position they're in. They're not actually skilled at what they do. This is the reality that a lot of these women are facing in their 50s, is what most men deal with their whole life, right? Where they get ignored, they're being rejected for jobs, they're feeling dejected, have no real reason why, they're getting treated like second-class citizens. And even though for many men, I would say, they can be extremely competent, and then they don't have anything to fall back on. And sometimes I see some of these women in their late 50s who are struggling financially. It's like early on in life, they could fall back on their looks and men giving them attention and special treatment, whether it's at work or in the social life. And then all of a sudden, they lose that, and they don't have the simp boyfriend or husband to kind of, support them financially and give them attention and everything they want. And then they're not necessarily benefiting from the hiring quotas that favor women, because typically you'd be favoring younger women, right? Because older men in middle management and senior management will hire and have a preference for a younger woman. Maybe they're sleeping around, who knows what's going on there. But then the simp co-workers, the simp managers, they're giving attention, like I say, to typically younger women, and older women are just kind of getting ignored, right? And this is the life of an average man. They're not getting that special treatment. It's like all of a sudden a woman hits 45 or something and older, and she realizes, oh, she's getting treated like everyone else instead of the special treatment she's got most of her life. Now, the thing is, in many of these cases, it could be easy for them to get a job if they are willing to take a significant pay cut, right? And a pay cut could involve, moving from senior management to middle management, like a managing director role to a vice president role. If they're going any generic office job, becoming a secretary, a receptionist, an assistant, they could do that, right? But lots of people in this situation, they aren't willing to take the massive pay cut. They've built up a level of social status, lifestyle inflation, rather than paying off everything they have. They were consistently leveling up their life, and that's the way they'd see it. Go from one apartment to a bigger apartment, one house to a bigger house. I see people doing it still now, even though this economy is terrible. And then they deal with a layoff and they don't know how to deal with it. I know people, without giving specific names, who are like married with like one kid, and they'll level up from a £450,000 house to a £600,000 house. So it's like they've increased their mortgage by 150,000, let's just say dollars to make it easy. Then all of a sudden one of them loses their job, and then they're struggling to pay their mortgage. And it's like, there's no need to buy a £600,000 house. If you're a married couple with one kid, you don't need that much space. So many people are living beyond their means. You won't believe it. You see it time and time again. Now, this is what I'm saying, right? When you reach this stage, this is why I provide career coaching, try to set you up in the right direction when you're in your 20s, 30s, or early 40s, is because after a certain point, it's kind of too late to like reskill, to upskill, to pivot from one industry to another. You can still do it. There are people who go into coding and tech careers in their 50s, but is that ideal? Did you not plan ahead? Are you not aware of what's going on in your industry before you do switch to another one, right? Did you not see the signs coming up earlier than that? Why haven't these people started successful side hustles earlier? They're still trying to get a side hustle up and running in their 50s. It's like, how did you not plan earlier, right? If you're in your 50s, how do you not have one rental property already when you should have, because it was so much cheaper to buy a house and so many stable jobs that you should at least have that, right? And they're still aiming for the baby boomer life, or they're aiming for that kind of rich metropolitan, cosmopolitan, single girl life, Sex in the City life when they're in their 50s. It's becoming a bit ridiculous.
A lot of senior citizens, retirees, right, in these jobs. Like the barista that was making my drink, she had to be in her 70s. But anyway, she had messed up. Because, I be ordering the drink and you got to do this, you got to do that, whatever. But she messed up or whatever. And the younger guy, there was just two of them. So it was like a younger guy that was at the register. And then it was the barista, older woman. So when I was like, oh, they forgot to add, I like to get a little bit of extra syrup. And then they forgot to add it, which everybody does that. When I order my lavender drink, I always add 2 extra pumps, and for some reason they take out the simple syrup and they just add the 2 vanilla pumps, and it's like, no, I want the simple syrup and 2 extra vanilla pumps. Anyway, so she forgot that, which is normal. I go to different Starbucks, they always forget it. So the guy, he was correcting her, and he was showing her where he marked it and all that. She was like, oh, I'm sorry. So I felt so horrible, and I'm like, oh, no, it's okay. You can just put the syrup in the drink you made. You don't have to make it over. So he was like, no, we're making it over because it's not gonna blend right or whatever. She was like, no, I'll make it. But she had to been in her 70s, and but I don't know. I'm thinking she in her 70s. She was a retiree. I don't care. She was a retiree. But my point is that that's sad. Those jobs are really supposed to be for the youth, younger folks, just getting into the workforce or whatever. But my point I'm making.
Now, the point she's making is, right, that when you have people at that age, it's kind of like what's gone wrong that they didn't plan financially ahead for that, right? They should have, particularly if you're older, 70s, you should have hundreds and hundreds of thousands in an investment portfolio, in a couple rental properties. It just doesn't make sense why you'd be in that position unless you have some massive setbacks time and time again in life, which does reflect on perhaps your ability to maybe keep a stable job, keep a stable marriage, things like that. But you never know. There are circumstances that make sense where people might not have jobs. But what's interesting here is you've got these broke boomers, right? And they're still in the job market. Now, in the corporate world, you see it with older generations clogging up the management roles. So Gen Z and millennials can't move up in their career because you've got a ton of, let's just say, Gen X or boomers or around that age group clogging up all the senior and middle management positions. You also have these kind of broke boomers going into what would be considered young people jobs, right? Where they're becoming a barista, they're becoming someone working at a grocery store. And I understand people have to work any job they can get, particularly if you are older and you don't have much options. But it just shows you how the older generations, and particularly the baby boomers, they had everything easy. They had stable jobs, big houses, tons of money to make investments in the stock market, in their pension, in additional rental properties. But how did they mess up this bad? Because sometimes I see younger people and they're trying to get into the job market and they can't because it's been clogged up by the older generations. And also it's like some of those entry-level jobs or jobs you'd get to supplement your studies, maybe you're at college or university. It's like you see a barista, like she says, they're older, or often sometimes now in London they'll be like migrants who just came to the country who barely speak English, and they're taking a lot of the lower paying retail jobs or barista coffee shop jobs and then all the younger people at college or university who are based in the UK or US, they can't get those entry level jobs that would supplement their income and make things easier for them while they're studying for a high paying corporate job, right? Like working in tech or finance or something like this, right? And when she's telling me this story specifically, it just reminds me of how much younger people, or in particular working age, military age men, who she mentions the guy working at the barista who's helping the older woman who's, the baby boomer barista to remake the coffee. So much of this society, really the pressure always falls on the working age, military age men. It's like, step in for the girl boss who's not doing her job properly, the baby boomer manager who's making mistakes and not paying attention, or the Gen X manager who's doing that, right? It's like the weight of this failed society is too much for competent men to keep carrying on. And it just goes to show, when you look at some of these comments, what's going on and how people are really struggling. Insomnia says, there are 3 older people living in their car at the grocery store I go to. I'm terrified, right? So you got older people living in their car because they didn't plan ahead financially. Sintro Roberts, as we can see here, she's saying, whatever, I retired in my 50s and never look back, which really raises the flag. People who do plan ahead, who can retire in their 50s. And what plan are you working on to retire early, right? So you don't end up like a lot of these people. Some additional comments. Biancon says, I don't plan to still need to work when I'm 50. People should be better with their money, right? And that's got 7 likes. So clearly people are picking up some of the bad decisions people make. Point and Laugh says, Walmart hires old people if you don't mind being bossed around by immigrants, right? Which is the awkward tension between who's taking some of the lower paying jobs that people rely on a backup, baby boomers, immigrants, things like that. Then we've got John Mayer. He's saying, fired on Friday, forgotten by Monday. And this is the reality for so many people, right? They think, it's going to be easy. I'll just work my corporate job forever. They're not planning ahead. And if you're fired on Friday, as he says here, due to a layoff, you'll be forgotten by Monday. If you ever worked in a job where someone's dealing with a layoff or gets fired or even leaves the company, I've dealt with that many times working at different companies. All of a sudden, a team member moves to another company or they get fired because they're not keeping up with the harsh performance requirements you have in the finance industry. What ends up happening, they get fired, some people feel bad about it, or they're moving on, and some people have a little leaving drinks. The next day or the next couple of days, you'll hear people moan about the same employee that they felt sorry for. And this what comes back to like what I try to help my clients do throughout their coaching in their 20s, 30s and early 40s is planning ahead, right? You don't want to deal with multiple setbacks and you're old, unemployed, divorced, right? And then you can't find a job. You're busy trying to build a side hustle when you can't even find a basic job in the job market to supplement your income. You really got to plan ahead. Now, this is what I help with my clients to do, because particularly we see even layoffs, the last few weeks, Amazon had more layoffs, other companies doing a lot of layoffs. 2026 is just going to get worse, right? So if you want, schedule a call with me now. I help you deal with things before the industry gets even worse throughout many corporate jobs. A link in description to speak with me directly, 2 recommended videos on your screen right now, and let me know what you think about these clips.